Good evening. Thanks for listening. This is White Ash Flies with Colin Mahoney, and tonight we're presenting, not in time for Easter, The Golf Outing, an Eastertide triptych read and written by Colin Mahoney. You can follow White Ash Flies on SoundCloud, Spotify, or on Twitter at Colin Mahoney15. And now for The Golf Outing, an Eastertide triptych by Colin Mahoney. 1. The Visitation. At the express center of the ocean, in a room so pressurized one can but darkly root, bet improbably for a balk in the 6th, a broken bat in the 7th, a sort of luck that seeps in and corrodes, and the TV goes off the air in a low static gush. Low, wet memories. A dark so-minded breaks with things, with longings hollowed and carved into strange fish that eye him sidelong, then swim off to their grottos to think it over. Still sitting up in bed, head bandaged and drinking immeasurably small hours, he glows like a pile of clinker with the essence nearly out. A smoking field the wind glows over. Maya, his wife and antagonist, left nothing behind but what the floor breeds. Midges' wings fledged from mud on the doormat. The crazy silvering traffic of slugs. Whatever teeming you might expect from the reverse side of our attentions, the many-handed, the but dimly perceived, each holding in its mandibles stress lines that bound him to an incontrovertible bed. They mumbled live wires. Of course, when one looks at one's husband sub specie eternitatis, etc., etc., electrically, pneumatically pumping, into that place of a flowering near the pubic bone, of a mushrooming downward, born of equinol, dexterol, and doridan. And on the wall, a mezzotint, hung and lit instantly. A landscape with cooling tower under a galvanized sky, and freight eternally rolling underneath. A bike leaned on the dark its warped glint, the last horse that tossed him, his license already in suspense, along with everything else she left him, along with skull fragments in thinning infinitude, and a derangement between head and humerus, and a shave closer and closer until, all of a sudden, in the humming fluorescence, all 4 of them were there, already settled in, 2 at the table, 1 in an armchair, and the 4th at the foot of his bed, who read off symptoms as if off a clipboard. Dorsal root ganglion, a bad case of the grip, black mold in the joints, lungs flowering noxiously, a mind, though temporarily paused in its tearing apart, active in its crevices, static in its case, and everything else a cold fire can consume, itself included. But taken altogether, if unequally, you're mending, if grayly, and are no longer contagious. Time to scratch blood to the surfaces and rub heat into the nodes. And with that, one found the whiskey in glasses, another found the cabinets burst and blowing with grasses, windy with buffalo. Another built a fire, and the 4th found the rodeo on TV. Then they stood him up in the mirror, all bloat and ash, head bandaged and smoking, a shave closer and closer. A dead toenail, like a pearled cataract, stared back, before the blue sock and the moldering sneaker. And he was put in the car in the back seat between two of them, and they drove past the blue chip and under the cooling tower, around its cascading waters, past garages freestanding, half-eaten by fires of dogwood and sumac. And he was dismayed to arrive at the municipal course, home of one of the 7 mouths of hell the Pope won't fly over, to jungle golf, to horse shit. 2. The burning of the boats. All the ladies were there, with attendants and lilacs and 6 skeleton horses and their drivers, riding out in cars and carriages on Marathon Day, to watch the roof, covered in parts and scaffolding and entirely on fire, finally collapse from above. The beloved way bit her ends round blissfully. The beloved who spilled salt off the table, centered with centuries-old peonies. We sing a makeless lady where she lay, as morning dew on the spray. He came so still there too, as the dew on the grass of an April morning, came among the ground cover starred with pine cones and wake robins, to the south side of a bright week where Table Mountain shears off, and the Bonneville slides less than 1 horizontal mile, among the steeps where the thrushes have songs and the dogs have candida. The voltage is different through this flawed material. The field here, hers, who either attracts or distracts electrons, who brought topology to bear on his problems. His, whose yield is back, is sore, and aptly enough putting around the practice greens to relax his hands. Those hands once so good-natured and relaxed. Those hands which are along with his arms and shoulders so apt for violence. Those hands that expressed themselves like club faces, and held, if for an instant, then an eternity, the supple, round, inviolate golf ball, now a slight tremor and smoking incessantly. She attended, in her ordinary attitude of loveliness. And yes, streams have hands, and the leaves are palms, are sensitive to spectacles. Her palm is open to another's, hers, whose fingertips touched only hers, held a heart on fire, a cold fire befitting the hour. Her cold tresses run blue-green, not from sickness or stillness, but from good natures, and because blue-green loveliness burns cold. She's tributary to Ray's Creek, who is herself a distant tributary to alpine flowers, grasses, and streams. Her fingertips are points of contact, of ignition, of adhesion, pulled the sky tight as a drum to cover him, protect him from those 2 ravening dogs, his brothers, on the other side. So thought you who are integral, who taught us to breathe into our intestines, to swing like clock arms from the hips, the pizzle, the very centers of us, eyes plumb-lined to our balls. You who see us plenty, see us green fairways centered by our balls. Along bending verdure, you lean back, breathing and thinking of the singular way things dispose themselves. You warm our ligaments so that our swings speed evenly. You laid our days out in clean powdery lines, on scorecards with stubby pencils, pars and birdies alight. That's his prayer during warm-ups, stretching hamstrings and twisting torsos. And as always, she answered him with a tap-in par at 1. When he putted, fingertips along the skin of her throat that drained the cup. But when the turf's a south tower, calamitous as along the fairway at 2, that's where there's a hiatus in his game. The other who worked the rest away, clear and pale, after all of it's removed but Maya's hairpins. There on 4, where a clean shadow rests on light arches, in facing galleries in the upper air, that great dispenser of seeds of galleries, the only ones that ever materialize. Trim columns locked in columbine, locked in strife, lilies of gravest energy blooming beside him all day. Clarissa Bell pealed about a beautiful restorative dream, a restorative Florida, an iridectomy, tender as she is for ophthalmologists. The left eye's 6th operation on the 7th, after a chunk shot showered black earth and found the greenside bunker on 8. Angel food cake and ice cream, in a field of asphodels, sponges, and hydrangeas. Strangulation of rose and blackberry jam. On 10, when he saw splendid things for a moment or so, elevators and escalators, the impulse for once having free play inside him. Doubt you whether hers and his ran together? Lest he swing in rapture, he set his club face like flint. On this course so penal off the tees, greens that needed beating into submission some 7,000 times, he figured he'd figured them out. Doomed to figure 7,000 times over again. Hole locations always looming terminally high or terminally low. Balls ever rolling away above or rolling away below. Ups and downs notwithstanding, parts of which remain uncovered, unless we discover all her grounds, or lose why she lives, clear and pale. Apropos of ups and downs, he had 3 key ones on the front 9, 3 par 3s, 3 graces, 3 birdies at 2, 5, and 8. Or was it 3, 6, and 9? Where he lofted fairway metal, paused momentum, poured angels through pinholes, dealing angles and drinking glycerol ester of wood rosin to keep his oils in suspension. He who existed ages ago, merely resting in the meantime, adrift in the noontide, pars saved to stay even. He made his mistakes long and used the slope the ball released down, like coming home to his wife vacuuming the ceiling to soothe her nerves, like a mild electric current bearing showers over a soft afternoon in full maturity. Whoever it was warped her mind. I'm speaking of the Weathers. At 11 she was a sky shot through with quick, hard, serpentine lucidities, sudden lightnings and déjà vus. At 13 she set a fire in her rooms in 4 places, imagined confidences and other addictions, because God himself has animal instincts. She stayed through 14 in gathering alarm. Minerva, guide my irons. And the elms and their leaves, who had heretofore danced quietly in the background, now showed in sudden intuition their fair undersides. Every elm in shivering waves, except the one cat's corner to stop 43, with her limbs upstanding, which they say indicates distress, at having to stand for 3 hours and 7,000 years of photographs, made to stand there in this dress. He pitched the ball like a Rainier apple pitched end over end and oddly elongated, pulled at the corners and reddened with the hour and flight to 15, held aloft by sonora vortex, twisting the torsos of trees. This joy like no other, even piled to highest bliss, as no other angle is. Be glad or brightly spoused. Be glad our gladness wells Hennessy, mirth endlessly. No white light spilled without pity, no love lent without change. A 3/4 swing on 16 hung in the charged current like a reef shark. Through all that electricity, balls and debris blown from their stalks. All of us but the hagfish have a pineal eye in our head. Our heroes eats flesh. Is a red coal burning through the back of his head now, a pine cone dripping dimethyltryptamine, like a dripping transgression. He reiterated thrice his prayer. Don't be a douchebag, don't be a douchebag, don't be a douchebag. At that moment, the sky bowed low to meet blue heron. Who was it said, if you ground your clubs to start with, you're to the point of impact. In other words, you've preset a fat shot. Those words purled over his brain, in suspense over his ball on 16, while the blue heron standing there in the fairway sneezed twice and searched for a third sneeze in the sun, broad stretching her beak just as a cat's paw pushed his ball in flight. 4! Over the lake and radiant faces, and Go plopped it down her gullet in astonishment, like swallowing live fire. And yet her anatomy still allowed her lungs to fill and release an anguished shriek that shocked all the birds gathered into uprising from the lake and the low ground in front of the green. The water stood in his eyes. Cigarettes were lit and beer bottles opened. Because only 2 movements matter, and buoy beer fuels both. During stoppage of play, sandpipers waded and combed through long grasses, her cold shimmering tresses, and a blue-green song buzzed in the sawgrass. A tap-in par at 17, but we're talking towers of anxiety over the tee at 18, the artifacts of implements parked in the cannibal grass on either side of the fairway, the horses to be shoed, arches to be nailed up for flowering, as all sons must cover for their fathers, if they'll bear covering, so that their orchards be dusty and fruitful, and there be ponds of Chardonnay. His 4-iron brought pain, where the course blind dog-legged along a scar, closely packed with scrub oak and pine, in a dense second growth, the first having gone to smelters. His ball landed in there, and one of a family of scamps who have occupied and enlarged upon that scar heard, 4! and nearly caught the damned thing and ran it over to the cup and out of sight. The others were dubious, but our hero looked in, and a Callaway 7 looked back at him, a little cockeyed and doubting Thomas. Regardless, a municipal eagle on 18. And the others found him and swept him up in his rod lavers, carried him past hillside rows of eucalyptus trees, whose stripped torsos were smooth and radiant, and the crowds milled in the humidity, in bottomless sight, skins dark shining, night opening like an exit wound over a necklace of greens. He was voluble among the shades. We housed them. Honest to God, we did. From rabbits to dodge shadows driven in the ground. When all is said, distance is the great leveler. If I accomplish one bare thing before 40, and on in these veins. Weren't his drives Mahlerian all day? Yes, they were, he admitted. And what about the Scherzi in my short game? Did I hear you mention Derry? There's a chick I used to party with from Derry. And on, volubly into the humidity. There's no one unique model or mannequin for the tartan jacket. Only him and the others who have worn it before him. His brothers, each the spitted image of the other two, standing there in the shadows, sheepish or even shamefaced, as if meeting unawares at Aunt Nancy's Easter garden party, like Irish Karamazovs in tartan jackets, made to wait for the fucking keg to settle, or for Pat to come back with a fucking ice bucket. All three of them fresh off long dry Lents, one of them in leafy rehab in Saugatuck, the second in county jail, the third in a hospital bed. Happily for them, not all sources of the year are off limits, of the signs and cataracts and wonders done in his hand. A perfectly glaucous and iridescent setting under the arches. He's a steelhead caught and released in exhilarated water. They've fed bare heaven on creatures like him, met in the shudder and hush, made strange to themselves. Fixed once thought, one admired of the other that he could still work violence into it even into middle age. We showed him standing rock narrowing, tall as a man. We showed her there. We showed her where she'd live, under a narrow galvanized sky, inclined to heaping, walls listing under new lines of stress, doubling back for the bright unreason of it. Snakes and ladders, and kids made to travel great distances alone, much as he traveled here, all of his seconds arriving after him, in dripping succession, from the same vein, like a clepsydra of drink orders. Someone mentioned the boats, and he was off like Hector, freshly bandaged and keen for it, humid fruit in the shadows installed there. He sat at roulette, and his skull radiated winning numbers as if over loudspeakers, but as close as a grasshopper set on its incus, or caught in an oracle, like a glutted bee caught by God at the bottom of a buttercup. A ravine, in fact, split his head down the center, full of cicadas singing winning numbers. He was a gray stalk who bloomed smoke volubly, the shadow of what once bloomed in Laguna once, but no longer. Certainly not here. On the furthest marathon day on record, with sudden bones and thunder in the sky. And as he had long since lost his flange, he fell, and the others covered his exit with bagpipes and lilies. We saw him last on the back deck, his dark head blocking a floodlight that lit the siding deep yellow, his profile caught in the dark's burning limit. At first and last, he said, the room is emptied. Unrest ends at first and last. Hector's back in bed, frenzied to stillness. Would slide, but the sheets bind him. 3. The deposits, debits, and balance thereunto. He got into his car finally and drove to Michigan. In the afternoon, they buried in her favorite dress. In her favorite afternoon. After standing in the backyard with a head cold. Down 1220 through bright wood and gray wood to which the sky was pinned hypodermically. By the sun unceremoniously. On the radio, crystal gale about brown eyes turning blue. Them's the switchbacks for you. Role reversals. I ought to fill the sky, or the sky ought to be filled by me. I renounce your fasts, your cold fastnesses, the barbarous way you dice onions. Through the tolls, through the screens he came still unto her, in his fits. The sun is hard at my side. Feel it here, for yourself. How can you cry when your eyes are out, when you're packed and trundled off in the dark, like the hooded rose, like Jonah in his booth, after Noah recedes with all God's gifts? She even learned to cover her lily with her hand in the presence of tall men. We'll be back regardless. We're exterior to one another, exterior to the euchre I loathe, the balderdash I deny. We're a man among lampstands. Is there any argument behind this? Yes. That his hide might fall among them and pass them, fair girls departed fair hemispheres, on his way to colder fastnesses, more humid evenings, lower income taxes. Turning north, the hard light and atmosphere held the hyperboloid that's hovered in his dreams. Someone said, "They're like two people going to the bottom of the river, one diving, one falling." Well, you'll need keys to breathe in down there, or ought to sleep up in the deer blinds on someone else's property, where life comes to you, comes of you as to the sound of a bell, or silently. The sun is the hard object at my side. Put it out and feel your way through the divots. For me. And it's no lark. There's a sadness when you get to the other side of it, among the screens, and you find yourself in the presence of another, totally unknown, but identifiable just like you. Absolutely, impossibly so. It was the impossibility that outnumbered her, so especially alone. Our loves are catastrophic, collide at adverse angles. She'd describe hands full of sleep, hearts of mercy, full of fears, hearts of mercy, full of grief, hearts on fire. For us they open up, for ourselves and our beloved bodies, and any other animal instincts that wander in before the screen door sighs closed, and the floorboards stop thundering but still breathing. Will you please bring her near, her bed, her nervous system closer to me? We can't, of course, but at least her inflection is always and everywhere.